Good to see you all. Have you noticed I'm on time, I think, for the first time? I've also got slow mode activated, not snow mode. It just shows you where my mind is at this evening. Is everyone well? Stephanie, good to see you there. 12-step woman, see you are moderating here. It's good to see you here. I'm just trying to bring up a Word document. That's a bit better. Okay. I'm kind of used to this cockpit situation where I've got quite a few screens and I've got a glass of water and I just sort of have everything where I sort of need it. It's a little bit weird when you're in a totally different setting, but I've got good news for you guys. I might actually be doing some more videos with interesting backgrounds, so in interesting environments over the next while. Midnight Sun, good to see you. Catherine Perez, hi. Marlene Stewart, good to see you there as well. So let me just give you a heads up for tomorrow. Tomorrow is the 14th anniversary, I believe, of the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. That's May the 3rd. And so I'm going to be taking you guys through my theory. I'll be talking about when I think whatever happened, and where it sort of happened. And I'm not going to talk about who, and I'm not going to talk about why. So I'm going to leave those two parts of it out. But I'm going to be doing it from quite a scenic location, probably at about 4 p.m. my time, but I'll let you guys know what time that is wherever you are. But it'll be, again, with a sun setting kind of scenario. Colleen Sulik, hello from Texas. Hi there. Bling is the new black. Hi. Catherine, I've said hello to you. There are only 34 people watching. Wow, is there not really so much interest in the Everest disaster? I was hoping that when I came back from my trip, I'd have 30, where am I now? 34,500 subscribers, but I see I missed it by 7. So if you're watching and you haven't subscribed, please do. I was also hoping that video that I put up would have about 3,000 views. It's, I think, at about 2,800, so not too bad. I do think as we go into the story further and further, people will catch on and become more and more interested, right? So I think that's definitely going to happen. Someone's already asked me to comment on Mallory and Irving. Who really was the first to climb Everest? I mean, even that's a mystery. In true crime, we talk about, unsolved mysteries and so on. Well, the person who actually climbed Everest first is an unsolved mystery. So I will be talking about that, maybe just a little bit further into everything. There's quite a lot of intrigue surrounding that. I mean, officially, it is Edmund Hillary from New Zealand, who became like almost as famous, I'd say, as Neil Armstrong, but he became famous his entire life for being the first man on top of Everest. But it's possible that someone had already beat him to that decades earlier. Nicole Boutelier, hello, good to see you. Stephanie says, don't forget to like and subscribe. Kirsty McKenzie, good evening. Love this Everest dissect. I'm a big Scottish Munro climber. Oh, okay. I am going to tell you guys about the climb back. I actually want to, I don't think there'll be time, but I might do this on Patreon if there isn't much time and depending on how today goes. But, as I'm sitting here, I'm mentally quite rested in a way, which is why I've been able to set slow mode on and why I've been on time and so on. But I think physically I'm really exhausted. I can't tell you where all the aches and pains are. Of course, I've just completed a 179-kilometer mountain bike 3-stage event. I'm not really, I don't think I've ridden my mountain bike more than 12 times in total, including the last 3 times I rode it. So that makes it a lot more difficult. So, but there are a lot of things to compare with that journey that I took as an inexperienced biker, as someone looking for adventure, as someone joining a group of people who are more experienced, and all the dynamics involved. So I'll sort of take you through some of that stuff. Stephanie says sometimes you need a vacation from your vacation. So I did want to come back from this trip physically tired, physically fitter, physically stronger, physically having exerted myself. I didn't want to be in a place where I'm thinking a lot. I didn't want to be online. In fact, at the hotel I was staying, although they had Wi-Fi, the lady who sort of chaperoned me to my room, when I said, well, what is the Wi-Fi code? She said, well, can you call room service? It's quite difficult to explain. And then I never got round to it. And so I was, for all intents and purposes, offline for the 3 days that I was there. Okay, so there are 50 people signed on now. Are you guys ready for me to get going? If you guys want to see the mountain bike trip that I went on, just go to my Instagram. I've put up quite a lot of photos, some video that gives you a sense of what is going on there. Okay, so should we get started? In the previous episode, which is basically the previous live to this one, we sort of stopped at the point where Boukreev summited. We basically stopped at the point where they reached the top of Mount Everest, right? And he summited in pretty good time, given what was going on. I think if he had been climbing on his own, he probably would have summited 3 hours earlier or something. But he summited at 7 minutes past 1, which was 7 minutes past the original deadline. And then he was followed by John Krakauer. So the journalist on the Adventure Consultants team, that's Rob Hall's team, the journalist that was supposed to be on Scott Fisher's team was the first sort of non-guide to summit. And that shows you just how strong he was. So Krakauer not only was climbing strongly, but he was kind of climbing conscientiously, like with a deadline in mind, like we need to be there at that time. And so Boukreev was sticking to that, and so was Krakauer. So they kind of in the right place at the right time. They kind of in the zone. They should be on the mountain, and they should be where they are on the mountain, so that they're climbing on schedule, right? And then Beidelman and Adams, they summited 13 minutes later. Now it's getting a little bit dicey already, but it's still sort of okay. So there are basically 4 people at the top of the mountain that are basically safe, just 4. And these are kind of giving a sense of who are the strongest men that day from all of the teams. And it doesn't mean that they just climbed and got there. They obviously had to wait for climbers to catch up. And that kind of happens quite a lot. They climb as a team and this and that and the next thing. Clev Skooning arrived at 13:45. Now it's getting close to that absolute deadline of 2 o'clock. And Boukreev took his photograph. After Skooning, the flow stopped. And this is what was a problem. Remember Ed Versteers, when we did the previous episode, he said, there are a lot of people on this mountain that shouldn't be here. Well, the fact that this deadline of 2 o'clock came and went, that basically is the evidence that the people trying to climb the mountain actually couldn't climb the mountain, right? One thing I haven't really spoken to you much about is Beck Weathers on his way up. And I don't want to talk too much about Beck Weathers, but Beck Weathers, he had a problem with his eyes, and he actually, I think, knew that he had a Difficulty, maybe he didn't, but anyway, the point is that he couldn't actually see properly where he was going, and so it was kind of due to snow blindness, or kind of due to difficulty seeing, that he wasn't able to go any further. And so his story was that, this is lower down, that when he couldn't go further, Rob said, "Stay here until I come back." And then in fact, it actually said, "You need to go down." And then when he didn't want to go down, he said, "I didn't want my day to be over." Bear in mind, he can't see anything. I mean, what's going on now? What's there to have of the day? And I think that is a little bit of ego, where you don't want to sort of say, "I'm giving in, I'm going down, it's over for me." You sort of want to sort of hang in there, or I don't know, maybe still try, I don't know, whatever. But there's a bit of the ego coming in. And anyway, so his story was that Rob told him to stay put and wait for him. And so, that's his story, but then ultimately he never did that. Ultimately, he didn't wait for Rob, who never returned ultimately, but he didn't wait for Rob and then come down with Rob. He came down with people other than Rob Hall anyway. I think that's quite an important point to stress. But I think the point I really want to stress before we even get to all the other things is that Beck Weathers got himself into trouble. And then Beck Weathers got himself out of trouble, right? And I want to compare that to, just briefly, to the mountain biking thing I went on. I went on this trip with the least training, I think, of everyone in the group of 20, right? And I went with the cheapest bicycle, and I'd probably ridden it less than anyone else. And so I had some difficulties. And whose fault is that? And who's supposed to help me, right? And so you have this strange hinge going on in the mountains, right? Where one moment, and it's the same in a way with mountain biking, you're trying to get a sense of adventure, you're trying to get a sense of your own heroism, you're trying to get a sense of triumph and adventure, right? And that's only going to be possible for as long as you are acting independently, right? And you are kind of in control. So you are independent and you're in control. What's happening is based on your autonomy, right? And as soon as you change that dynamic and you now are dependent, in other words, you can't get yourself out of your own situation, then you are no longer in control, right? So you become going from independence on the mountain to being dependent on someone else, a guide. I'm talking about almost fully dependent, where in the beginning you somewhat independent, you can do your own thing, you can climb independently, to becoming very dependent, from being in control of your destiny. I want to go this way, I want to go this space, at this pace, I want to have this sort of experience, whatever, to I'm no longer in control because I've lost my independence, right? And that's literally how it goes. The difference is on Mount Everest, you are independent and in control and autonomous, but as soon as it swings the other way, you could lose your life if the person that you're depending on decides, well, look, you know what, I can't look after you. I've got to look after myself. And it's no one's, if you're on Mount Everest and you don't look after someone else, it's not murder. It's sort of an unwritten rule. Everyone is up there for the same reason, and it's no one's job they're not Mount Everest police. I guess there are, in a way, the people that enforce the permits. But what I mean is, there's no one saying, look, it's your absolute job, your absolute responsibility to take care of that person's life. So in other words, if a guide says, look, we shouldn't be here, I'm going to save myself, it's okay. It's not very heroic, but it's acceptable. It's, or isn't it acceptable? And that's really one of the things I've been trying to deal with in my books, Neverest. is it acceptable to climb a mountain, to be a hero, and step over dead bodies on the way, or dead bodies on the way back, right? So do you get what I'm saying? That you can go from that moment of being in control and a hero to suddenly running up against your own hubris and your own inexperience, and then suddenly it's the opposite dynamic. Suddenly you are not in control, you're dependent, and you're also not a hero, and you could lose your life. That's the situation that they're in, right? So you must bear in mind you've got some very strong climbers up there like Boukreev, who on the summit, and he spends about an hour on the summit without oxygen, and he starts feeling cold and tired, and he's just waiting for the other climbers to come, and they're not coming. Now, some people have criticized him and saying he shouldn't have been so far out in front, but the fact is he was setting a pace that was right? In other words, he was where they all needed to be at that time. So that's the counter argument. So in this thing that I've prepared, so there's just a little bit of a document I've got here, a couple of pages dealing with the descent. I wrote, of all the coverage, Anatoly Boukreev's book, The Climb, got the story best. Of course, it was written from the point of view of being inside his climbing boots, but at least I recognized what he wrote as being the same trip I was on. And that's actually a quote from Sandy Hill Pittman, right? I'm going to read it to you again. She says, of all the coverage, Anatoly Boukreev's book, The Climb, got the story best. Of course, it was written from the point of view inside his climbing boots, but at least I recognized what he wrote as being the same trip I was on. Now that seems to be, and that's how I'm interpreting it, it seems to be a bit of a snub to the other book written by Sandy Hill Pittman's sort of, counterpart. So the other journalist, you could say her rival or her counterpart, whatever you want to call it. Oh, 12-Step Woman, thanks very much. What's your take on all the dead bodies and garbage on the mountain? What's my take on all the dead bodies and garbage on the mountain? I'd sort of like to deal with those sort of non-Everest disaster questions separately, but shall I deal with it? My take on all the dead bodies is that they do accumulate on the mountain. So you are going to get bodies accumulating. And every time people climb the mountain, they leave behind oxygen cylinders, they leave behind feces, they leave behind litter, they leave behind, whatever. Whatever. I know when my brother climbed Mount Kilimanjaro, he left behind quite a lot of clothing. So it's actually inevitable that the litter piles up, especially oxygen bottles. But you can have a situation where there's a storm and your tent is tattered to pieces by a storm, and then of course you just abandon the tent. You're not going to fold up a ruined tent and bring it back, and then these kind of things accumulate. And so if someone, for example, falls down and they're struggling, it's difficult to see them between all the debris that's there. But I do think that the excrement it's not only on Mount Everest, there are quite a few other mountains as well where it's a problem, like Aconcagua in South America, where there's actually a rule you've got to pick up your excrement and take it with you. I mean, would that make you want to climb a mountain? Is that kind of rule? But the excrement and the litter being analogous to death, that's people think about Everest as the shining pure white beacon of light, and it's this incredible thing, but there's also feces and dead bodies and litter and all that kind of thing, and that's that part of it's not very heroic. That's the nightmare on the other side of the fairy tale, right? So I just want to get back to Sandy Hill. So what Sandy Hill is kind of doing is she's saying, I like Anatoly's version of events, and I what do you call it? I endorse what he said. And she doesn't necessarily say that I reject John Krakauer's account, but of course, I don't. As far as I recall, Stephanie, you can maybe, because I think you've read it quite recently. You can confirm what I'm saying here. In Into Thin Air, does John Krakauer criticize Sandy Hill? Does he say, well, does he sort of have any complaints about her? Heather West, thank you very much. Appreciate it. I remember you were here last time as well, so that's good. So, yeah, Stephanie, you're right about her being there, used up so many resources and manpower. So you can talk about the independence of climbers like Boukreev and John Krakauer getting to the summit very early on. You can talk about that and you can say, wow, shouldn't they have been helping other climbers, both of them? But that is where the other climbers needed to be as well. They needed to be independent and they needed to be, strong or whatever. But in a situation where they're not, and they're paying guides to get them to the top of Everest, and they kind of understanding that this is going to be the situation. We've got the experience and we're going to guide you to the top of Everest. Then aren't you sort of depending on that kind of thing? Aren't you depending on that situation? So when I was mountain biking, there were quite a few times, even before I went on the event, where I just thought, you know what, where I kind of had like a reality check just in the quiet space of myself, where I just thought, you're not prepared for this. I don't think you should do it. And then I looked on the website and I just said, look, you can get into the sweeper vehicle if you're struggling. And again, it's totally different to being on Everest. In a mountain bike event, you can get in the sweeper vehicle and it's easy. The vehicle takes all the strain, right? It's not really much strain at all. But on Everest, if you start struggling, someone else has got to take the strain, another human being. And they are literally going to struggle for hours with you, and you are literally going to be a burden to them. And and something else that just I realized while I was mountain biking is I was using this not very expensive bike. I think it was 10 times cheaper than everyone else's. I am thinking of upgrading my equipment, but I think amateurs tend to rely more on their equipment and use up more resources in terms of their equipment than sort of other people, right? And what I mean is I broke my equipment. You could say because I'm an amateur. You could also say because the equipment wasn't very good, but I was using up resources. Also, the sweeper vehicle at some points had to, look at what I was doing and all that kind of thing. There's a flip side to all of this. Even though I wasn't very fit, I did ride quite strongly at times, and there's some pretty crazy moments. One of them was kind of like a Beck Weathers moment. I might tell you guys about that. It's really quite funny. Is it Jan or Jan? I guess it's Jan. Jan 090. Thanks very much. Thanks, Stephanie. But the point is, you can also have a situation where someone who's a beginner or an amateur uses up almost as much resources as the absolute expert, because they are straining things in ways that they shouldn't be strained, right? If you try and imagine climbers going up the Hillary step and there are ropes there and also all sorts of other things, and they are teetering and tottering and just clumsily going up, they are actually probably loosening some of the things that are there and wearing them down. But you can also imagine a climber who's going up extremely quickly might also do the same thing. But I somehow kind of imagine that an amateur would do it worse. You know what I mean? An amateur can really make a mess of a situation. Kiyu, thank you very much. Keep it up. Thanks a lot. Thanks for that. So let me get back to this, the narrative. It says here, a star was spotted in the middle of the day above the south summit. That's quite something. Eh? If you just think about, on this day of all days, they spotted a star in the middle of the day above the south summit. Now, what was that? Was it a UFO? Was it a comet? Apparently, it was not a comet because that had long since disappeared. So there was apparently a comet in the area, but it shouldn't have been there then. So apparently the Sherpas saw this star in the sky in the day on the lower slopes of Everest, and they became agitated. They who were already quite nervous, given lots of things that were happening, some questionable conduct on the mountain inside tents between climbers was going on as well. There was also kind of an early, the Sherpa did die, but there was an early casualty of one of the Sherpas, and that's also something that would sort of raise their, or kind of alert their sense of being worried or suspicious, right? So John Krakauer from Adventure Consultants said that on his way down, and he was at the front, just behind Boukreev, he counted at least 6 canisters, nowhere near enough for either expedition. So this is really the bottom line of the drama. You've got the guy who's right in front, the client essentially. I mean, he was a journalist, but I'm just saying he wasn't a guide, and he wasn't the team leader. The first person who wasn't part of the crew, essentially, of Adventure Consultants. Now, you could argue that as a journalist, he was part of the crew, but anyway, however you want to argue it, is he arrives, I think, at the South Summit, and he's just behind Boukreev, and there they find 6 canisters of oxygen. And there are, I think, easily 3-4 times as many climbers. So there's quickly going to be a situation of, someone mentioned the litter on Everest. Now you have a situation where there are only 6 canisters of oxygen that you may have miscounted, and maybe someone just got confused and they were put somewhere else. But remember, we spoke early on about certain climbers using up lots of oxygen in the beginning. Well, this is the result. So whatever the result is, whatever the technical number was, there was a perception that there wasn't enough oxygen, and that did play out exactly like that. And you would expect, with climbers taking so long to get to the summit, that they would run out of oxygen, right? And so the problem you now have is that who's going to get these 6 canisters of oxygen? The strongest climbers, the climbers who got there first, or the weakest climbers, the climbers who get there last, or who's going to get these canisters? Now just think about that. Who should get the canisters? And that's where you kind of get an ethical dilemma. And it's, in a way, you could sort of boil it down to, isn't it just first come, first serve? It's like first dibs. There's no justice, there's no right and wrong. It's whoever can get their hands on it, kind of thing. And so the problem is, you might have a climber like John Krakauer. He gets there, swaps out his empty bottle of oxygen, puts it down there, right? His empty bottle of oxygen. Then a climber comes up who's maybe done quite a decent job of climbing. They're trying to find their bottle. They've paid the price to be on the mountain. They've climbed quite well. But by the time they get there, there's actually no oxygen left. But it doesn't appear like that, because there is an oxygen bottle, except that might be John Krakauer's oxygen bottle or another client's oxygen bottle, but it's an exhausted bottle. And so that's the situation they are now facing, right? So you can see, when you ask the question, was it the weather or human error, that needle is starting to shift very far towards obvious human error. Like a simple thing like, well, you needed to climb on time. You needed to count your oxygen supplies. You needed to know, you needed to do, like, be able to do simple mathematics, right? Like be able to look at your watch and be able to count oxygen and pace yourself according to that. Now, that's quite easy to say when you're down on the ground, but when you're up there, it's not as simple. It's not as simple. And, you could again compare it with mountain biking and say, for me, I would say a rookie mistake with mountain biking is getting a puncture. Like, to me, that is silly and unnecessary. That's my standard. So I would say, like, getting a puncture is a rookie mistake. I would say the same with running out of bottled oxygen on Everest is a rookie mistake. It just shouldn't happen. You should have enough oxygen at least, right? And interestingly, both of them have got to do with the release of air, whatever. And I guess air pressure. But the other side of it is, someone might say to me, well, I think it's a rookie mistake that you're riding such a crappy machine and that the gear, you can't even change the gears. Not that I can't change the gears, but that the bicycle, I eventually broke my gear changer. The gear literally broke, so I couldn't use it anymore. And now I thought I was going to be in a situation, but I got myself out of it. So it was almost like Beck Weathers. I did something dumb, but I managed to get myself out of it. Does that then make me a hero, or does it make me, well, you did something dumb and you got yourself out of a dumb situation, so, a good story maybe, kind of thing, or interesting story or entertaining story. So let's just go back to the situation. Gamelgard, Fox, Madsen, and Pittman, with the help of Lobsang, made the summit by or just before 2:30. So that's not bad. So you've got quite a few clients from I was trying to see here. So they'd actually gotten mixed up in another slower moving group, which included a Taiwanese expedition and Hall's Adventure Consultants, right? So Mountain Madness were doing quite well. Scott Fisher's team of mostly Americans and a Danish woman who's trying to be the first Danish woman to the summit, they were doing quite well. And so they make it to the summit at 2:30. They're half an hour behind schedule, but if they just sort of gotten to the top and sort of cut their celebration short, they would have kind of been safe. But do you think they did that? Let's just look at your comments. Marlene Stewart. Okay, well, I see you guys are just chatting to each other. I'll come back to you guys in a moment if you've got comments about this. But so they arrive half an hour later. It's not the end of the world, but they need to now kind of stay on track. And this is where leadership is going to matter, where someone's going to need to say, guys, let's stick to the plan, right? And that's quite simple. That's where you either stick to the plan or you make a rookie mistake. Like you just forget about what you know, kind of thing. Okay, so what we can already see is that Rob Hall's Adventure Consultants expedition are not doing as well as Mountain Madness, and it's a group of lots of different people from different places. It includes Yasuka Namba from Japan, I think Lou Kashishka, quite a lot of different climbers, but they're from kind of all over the world. I think some of them are from Australia, and they are kind of struggling. And in any event, the group that's not struggling, Gamelgard, Fox, Madsen, and Pittman, they spend 40 minutes celebrating on the summit. Now, bear in mind, Lobsang, the young Sherpa, I think is 23 years old, he's the guy that's sort of shepherding Pittman, and he actually gets her up there quite quickly. Unfortunately, they don't go down very quickly, and this is where the hubris comes in. I'm now at the top of Everest. I'm going to celebrate until the cows come home. I need a selfie. I need another selfie. I need another selfie. I need another one. Now, think about 40 minutes on the summit of Everest. It's a really, really long time. Where every minute that you're not moving is a minute lost. It's a really long time to spend, and I think you can say, well, it's understandable that they would spend time there or whatever, but I think it was a failure of leadership at that point. Now, the difference between my analysis and a lot of the other people writing about it is I wasn't there, right? I wasn't there, and so I don't kind of have to defend my actions on the mountain because I wasn't there. I'm looking at the actions sort of dispassionately, saying, if you'd done something different at that point and at that point, things could have turned out better. Again, was it the weather or human error? Well, spending 40 minutes on the summit when a storm is brewing at the bottom isn't good. And you could again say, how long did Boukreev spent on the summit? Well, I think he spent an hour, but he got there very, very soon. So if you get there later, you can't spend as long there. In any event, each minute would cost them dearly, as you're going to see as we go through this. I want you to remember those 40 minutes when we deal with what happened that night, and think about those 40 minutes. I mentioned a quote from Pittman talking about Boukreev. Now I want to use a quote from John Krakauer just to counter that. Lobsang, this is a quote from John Krakauer. He said, quote, Lobsang did express mild surprise, however, that he received no money, no thank you, nothing from Pittman after the expedition for the help he provided her, right? That's a quote from John Krakauer. Now, it doesn't seem to be a nice or complimentary thing, either that Lobsang's saying or that John Krakauer is repeating. I don't know whether it's true or not, but if it is true, you've got to think, wow, you've got this guide who does a lot, expends a lot of energy to help a particular person, and she doesn't seem to express gratitude. She doesn't seem to even mention his name. And again, now you have that ego thing. So, I wish I could show you some of the articles that I went through, and maybe I can, if we have time. I won't do it tonight, but we might do it at some other point. But you sort of get the sense, as soon as they off the mountain, I mean, a tragedy is just played out, a terrible tragedy, which we're about to get to. And then lots of people have died, and they suddenly at base camp, they realize, wow, half the people aren't here. Then suddenly, like, they realize people have died. Oh, it's only then that it actually hits them that because people aren't actually at these chairs and that half the mess tent is empty, that those people are actually dead on the mountain. That's the first time it becomes kind of reality. And then there's kind of a memorial service, but there are already people giving interviews, and guess what's happening in those interviews? It's all about how I actually summited Everest. I did it on my own. It was tough, but I did it. And other people are sort of looking at this saying, but that's not true. You didn't do it on your own. That, you were crying and you were bawling and you didn't know how to do anything and blah, 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 blah. And then so you're having these, in other words, this whole heroic thing is becoming an ego thing. I don't want to admit that I was weak or whatever it is, right? And, when I tell you in this video, for example, that I went on this mountain bike thing and I had a terrible bicycle and I struggled here and there, I'm not happy to admit something like that. I want to have a triumphant story. But when you can admit that, then it shows that you are honest. And I don't know, what does it show? That you're not a hero? And who wants to admit that? Who wants to admit that? I don't think anyone does. So it's difficult, and it's especially difficult in a group setting with competing groups. So let's go back to the mountain. I'm going to just pick up the pace now. Okay, we're at 40 minutes. Okay, so by now, all the Mountain Madness clients who had started had made the summit. Again, Scott Fisher's team are doing really well. Remember what I said in the previous video, they were given quite a lot of autonomy, and this actually did help them. They were actually climbing without their leader. Fisher had not sent anyone back, despite the 1 o'clock suggestion as being a good turnaround time and 2 o'clock as the absolute deadline. But no plan appeared to be in place. So I think that's also quite important, is that the leaders actually said something along the lines of, we're going to set these deadlines, and then no one stuck to them. And what do you think's happening when that's happening? When no one is sticking to a plan, it's just becoming about ego and about hubris and about do whatever you want kind of thing. Where do you think that leads? Kirsty says you better get back on that bike. I can't, because it's actually broken. I can only use a one gear. The bike's actually at the bike shop now being repaired, but I'm probably going to buy a new bicycle just so that I can continue training. I have been kind of inspired by the experience. I did enjoy some of it, but I obviously want to enjoy it without mechanical issues. So, Corin Engelhard, Lean had a lot to say about would have, could have, and should have, but she didn't save anyone. Yeah, that's a good point. So I also found it quite interesting that I think she became a public speaker, and that you've got someone who's survived a tragedy going on to inspire people. I climbed Everest, and I'm going to people are going to pay to hear me talk about me climbing Everest, the big hero, and lots of people died. So what do you do? Do you leave that part out, or do you, how do you tell this heroic story? What she achieved is heroic, but people died along the way. So it's that's the thing. So after Gamelgard had left him, this is Scott Fisher, he'd not had any contact with his clients. They were all above him on the mountain. That's also really bad planning and a very bad scenario, is that Fisher can't actually even communicate with his own clients. He can't tell them, turn around. He can't change anything. It's sort of random. Let the chips fall where they may, right? So they were all above him on the mountain. Fisher and Lobsang were using a pair of old 10-channel radios to communicate. So there's another just crazy situation, is that they're using poor equipment, just like I was in my mountain bike race. So, you go there with poor equipment. What I think this is like the mountain is just this extraordinary terrain. It's this rough terrain. And people come there with their own crap. And the mountain exposes it. It's not really much more complicated than that. The mountain's not this amazing, miraculous place. It's not this sinister place where suspicious things happen. It's not this ghostly thing that's going on. It's basically a tower of rock, and against this rock, men and women bring their own personal crap, and that gets exposed on the mountain. It's as simple as that. It's really, and you have the same thing happening in life all the time, where people bring their own BS into situations, and then it's someone else's fault. It's happening all the time. There's a certain scenario that is a given. You could call it life. You can call it a mountain. You can call it a mountain bike race. You can call it, whatever part of the human journey you're on, whether you're studying, whether you're in college, whether you're in a job, whether you're in a marriage, and that's the mountain. And then you bring your crap into it, but then who do you blame? And do you ever blame yourself? Is it ever you? Now, that's why I say, talking about this mountain bike race, I could have trained more. I could have brought a better bicycle, but at least I think I had a fairly good attitude. And my attitude was, I know I'm not really well prepared. I'm quite humble. I don't want to give up, but I'm prepared to give up if I'm going to slow down everything for everyone else, if I'm going to make things difficult for other people, by taking very long, then I'm going to get into the sweeper vehicle. And I think something I'm quite proud of is I cycled 179 kilometers out of 188. So I missed 9 kilometers on about 3 training sessions in 2 weeks. And I think that is quite a good performance given how prepared I was. I'm not saying it's clever. I'm just saying I did ask a lot of myself. And I think I'm glad that I was able to give a certain amount. Does that make sense? Nicole says, hi, I've missed the beginning, but we'll re-watch. That's nothing. You're being harsh on yourself. Okay. Nick, you didn't put any other in danger. Okay, that's true. On the mountain, other people can literally pay for your mistakes, and that is definitely a reality. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to try and pick up the pace here in the story about going down the mountain. I've mentioned these Channel 10 radios. So get this. Scott Fischer arrived on the summit at 15:45. That's 2:45, right? That is almost 3 hours after the initial deadline, or 2 hours after the other deadline, right? And you've got to wonder what was going on in his mind. Was he thinking, well, it's okay if I summit later on, I'm strong enough, I'll do it. But it was actually the opposite. It wasn't okay because, first of all, he wasn't strong that day, and he knew it. In fact, he knew it much lower on the mountain. He knew that he wasn't in a. He said that he was tired. I think he said this to David Brashears in the documentary, that when they passed each other, he said, I'm so tired. And that was from shepherding clients far more than he should have, because he had clients that were so weak, right? When Dr. Hunt made radio contact with Scott Fischer on the summit, Scott Fischer said, I am so tired as well. And he'd been saying it all the time. He'd been obviously sick, and he'd been obviously kind of climbing slower than everybody else. And so him saying that, he wasn't saying, woohoo, he was saying, wow, I'm exhausted. And the difference between Everest and any other sort of event kind of, back down on Earth is that when you reach the summit of Everest, it's almost like, I wouldn't even say you're halfway. It's almost like you're a third of the way, because the climb down is going to take you a long, long time. So I think it's just something that the human mind, even though you can explain to someone and say, that's not the finish line, when you're doing it, it's very difficult to not bear that, to bear that in mind, to say, well, that's not the finish line anyway, I'm going to give up. There's still a long way to go. If it's just there, how difficult is it just to say, look, just get there, and then you've succeeded, right? And it's so tantalizing, it's just there. But actually, it's not just there, because someone was saying, the successful summit of a mountain includes coming down, the ability to come down, right? I think that's such a good point. It is, and I think we need to take that beyond mountain climbing. Is, when if you're going to start something, finish it. That is a successful thing. That is a successful venture. I think quite a good topical comparison to that is, consider the mountain of coronavirus. The top of the mountain of coronavirus is when, I guess, the world has been vaccinated, or when you've got world herd immunity or something like that, right? That's the top of the mountain, but you still got to come down the mountain again. And as you've seen in India, ironically, I mean, India borders the Himalayas. They are having a horrible situation almost when the world is relaxing. Oh, there's a vaccine out, it's fine. Anyway, but I think that's quite a good comparison about it's also important that the descent is as important as reaching the summit. So remember, Lobsang is the head Sherpa or the Siddharth for Mountain Madness. He'd gotten sick from using oxygen. He was there with him. So that's quite a weird scenario, was that Lobsang actually got sick from using oxygen. I don't know whether he was using oxygen that was mixed badly or whatever, but he was there with Scott Fischer. The impression I get is that, and I'm a little bit fuzzy on the details, but the impression I got is that Lobsang was climbing with Sandy Pittman and then was with Scott Fischer. So left Sandy Hill to be with Scott Fischer for a while, and then he would ultimately leave Scott Fischer as well on Scott Fischer's orders. We're going to get to that now. At that time, Rob Hall was also at the top. So Rob Hall's in a much better place than Scott Fischer in terms of his conditioning. Sorry, throat's a bit dry. Let me just look at your comments here. Colleen, I would love to tell you the story of the ride, especially the last day, because there was a pretty crazy turn of events. That's why I said it was like a Beck Weathers moment. But let's try and stick to the brief. So Rob Hall's on the summit, and he's not supposed to be there, but he's there to try and lure a client up that failed to summit the previous year. Rob Hall is impatiently waiting for one more client to summit. Now, bear in mind, Rob Hall's expedition hasn't done very well, so he's trying to get every climber up that he can so that John Krakauer can write a good story. You kind of get that impression, is that Rob Hall is pushing things a little bit because he's actually been outclassed or outclimbed, or whatever you want to put it, outdone by the Mountain Madness crew. But that's what makes it even worse, is that you're now going to have a journalist possibly exposing that. Not necessarily a journalist saying we had so many climbers, but you might have two articles, and the one article saying, well, so many of ours went up. And if you juxtapose them, you could see, wow, that team did better than that team, kind of thing. The irony, of course, is that you've got both team leaders on the top at the same time, and I think they're both kind of snookering each other. You sort of wonder if one of the team leaders had turned back with the other, or was turning back never an option, kind of thing. Anyway, so that's the situation. Now, bear in mind, both of these team leaders would die. Rob Hall and Scott Fischer would die. And that is indicative of you shouldn't be on the mountain after a certain time, exactly for this reason. So Hansen and Hall were on the summit just after 4 o'clock, right? So 4 o'clock is 2 hours, 16, it's 2 hours after the absolute turnaround time. Sorry. And then not long after that, Hansen collapsed. So Doug Hansen gets to the summit, and then he's done. He can basically not go any further. And there's quite an interesting backstory to Hansen, the school children that he was climbing for, and the fact that he climbed Everest before and failed. So you kind of got that backstory that's playing kind of in his mind, none of which is really helping. But of course, he now climbs to the top, collapses, and now what's Hall going to do? And this is the tragic situation where, you could say, should Hall have abandoned? what was the right thing to do, what was the best thing to do, what was the moral thing to do. And bear in mind, Rob Hall had a wife who was pregnant at the time. So you might say it would be wrong to abandon his client. Well, wrong from whose perspective? So anyway, the point is Hall refused to leave Hansen for several hours. He just wouldn't leave this guy, even though this guy was in a terrible state and couldn't really do anything. Okay, so he refused to leave him and finally was so weakened that he was unable to move. So you kind of just have a situation where Rob Hall was a good guy. He was trying to take care of his client, and then he compromised his own situation, right? And again, it's that switch from independence and control to something else. And if you high up on the mountain and you no longer independent and in control, and there's no one else there to help you, well, then you're going to die. That's literally the scenario, right? Andy Harris, a guide with Adventure Consultants, asked Lobsang, who was helping Scott down, right? So to take oxygen to Hall and Hansen for $500. So now you've got a situation literally of cross-team negotiation going on, and you know, there's a saying, money or your life. And if you think about ransom notes, where if you pay that amount of money, you can have this person back. You can have this person's life will be saved. Yeah, you literally have a situation on the mountain. I'm going to give you so much money. Is that enough to help that person, which may actually save their life? And so Lobsang answers, he says, sorry, I've got to take care of my group. And bear in mind, Lobsang is now one of the strongest climbers. He doesn't even need oxygen. And he basically rejects Andy's offer. And unfortunately, you could say if Lobsang had accepted that offer, would it have made a difference? I think it could have. I think it could have saved a life. Was Lobsang right to not take the money and not take care of his group? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. We don't know what the outcome is. If Lobsang had gone back up and something had happened to the people he was in charge with, that's another story. In the end, Harris went up. So Harris himself went up to help Hall and Hansen himself. And despite these efforts, neither the rescuer nor the other two survived. So all of those people from Adventure Consultants, Hall, Hansen, and Harris, they all died. They were all on the mountain far too late in the day. And two of those three were very experienced climbers, strong climbers, right? Meanwhile, Boukreev had hurried down the mountain ahead of everyone else to prepare tea to warm himself and to be ready for the clients reaching Camp 4. Krakauer called this a critical error. Sorry, my throat's really dry. Not sure if I'm going to be able to go much more than half an hour just because of this. So Krakauer called this a critical error. So he was critical of Boukreev going down the mountain so quickly. Of course, Krakauer also went down the mountain pretty quickly. And so he said, having the head guide and such a strong climber uselessly sitting in a tent at Camp 4 while the climbers higher up struggled wasn't a good plan. Ironically, as I say, this is exactly what Krakauer himself did, rush down the mountain as fast as possible without offering others any assistance, as far as I'm aware. But unlike Boukreev, once he reached his tent, he slept for the rest of the night, while one climber after another from his team died on the mountain. In all, four of Krakauer's 5 teammates perished that night, including team leader Rob Hall. I think you can look at that in two ways. You could say Krakow was right, Boukreev should have descended slower. But if you look at the situation with Rob Hall, Andy Harris, and Hansen, they were somewhere they shouldn't have been. And so sending someone up there then, do you think it would have saved anyone's life? I'm just saying you can't be that high on the mountain overnight. So, having a strong guide sort of hang around may not be the best thing to do. The wise thing to do was to descend as fast as possible. And the sort of flip side to the whole story is, so if someone has descended quite quickly and other climbers get into trouble, but those other climbers are able to get far enough down, that climber that's descended properly will be in a position to help the other climbers. And that's exactly what happened. Once again, the same scenario you can apply to Krakow and say, well, you were quite a strong climber. You started recovering quickly. Couldn't you have helped your fellow climbers? Okay, so, and I understand anyone who's saying, well, it wasn't his job. I understand that. It was Boukreev's job and he executed it. So what's the problem? So Boukreev arrived at Camp 4 at 1 o'clock. 5 o'clock. I was just thinking about the time he summited. So he summited at 1 o'clock, 7 minutes past 1. And it just shows you, I think he must have left the summit around about 2 o'clock. So it took about 3 hours to descend from the peak of Everest to Camp 4. So that's about how long it takes. Just that section is 3 hours if you pretty fast and know your way and all that kind of thing. So that's kind of a best case scenario, is it's going to take you 3 hours to get from the summit of Everest to Camp 4 if you're fast. If you're not fast, it might take you 4 or 5 hours. And so that's what you've got to be thinking. If I'm on the summit at 1 o'clock, I might be back down by 6 or 7 o'clock. If I'm on the summit at 2 o'clock, I might be back down and that's how the equation goes, right? Let me just see what some of the latest comments are here. Probably wasn't even necessary to activate slow mode because there are not hundreds of people watching. Bear in mind, if you're new to this channel, please subscribe. I'm going to be doing more content on Everest, and also for those interested, I'm starting to narrate my book Neverest on Patreon starting tomorrow. Boukreev saved team members of other teams too. Stephanie says, good point. Vicky, I love to hike and love a great view, but not willing to risk my life for it. Vicky, I actually watched, while I was away on this trip, I watched the movie Rush, which is deals with a rivalry between Niki Lauda and James Hunt. And it sort of ends, spoiler alert, it ends where James Hunt is racing through terrible weather, like really treacherous, rainy weather. I think it was the Japanese Grand Prix or something. And Niki Lauda just decided, look, this is crazy. I'm not going to risk my life in these conditions, and he pulled out. And then James Hunt went for it, and he won the world championship. And he later said to Niki Lauda, I was literally willing to risk my life. I literally was willing to put my life on the line. I was willing to lose my life in order to gain the world championship. And then he did gain the world championship. So for some people, it does sort of come down to that, I think. Okay, so let me go a bit further. Boukreev arrived at Camp 4 at 5 o'clock. Pemba Sherpa made him some tea. Boukreev thought Pemba had turned around on the way to the summit, but in fact Pemba had been waiting in Camp 4 all day and had an old black radio with him. So again, the fact that the radios didn't really work, and there was this miscommunication between the Mountain Madness squad. So you had bad radios and miscommunication, and you had a Russian dude who couldn't speak English very well. It was aggravating things. Stephanie just put a link to the first Everest book. Thank you very much for that, Stephanie. Someone actually also just left a review recently. I think it's the 79th review for Everest. I was quite pleased to read that one. So thanks a lot for that. Yeah, Ayrton Senna, you're right. Anyway, so Pemba had been waiting in Camp 4 all day, and Boukreev understood that the Mountain Madness clients would run. Boukreev was aware that they are now in a situation where they are going to run out of oxygen. So he left camp at 6:30. That's an hour and a half later in deteriorating weather. So Boukreev sort of gets to the bottom and is like, okay, Pemba's here. He shouldn't be here. I'm going to have to do my job, basically. And so he gets organized, and what is he doing? He has 3 oxygen canisters in his pack, which is quite a lot of weight to be carrying. And his plan was to offer this oxygen to clients as they needed it, right? But freight trains, as I described it, pounded the mountain. So now a storm was hitting. So now you say, was it the weather or human error? Oh, no, it was the weather. Well, it's only at this point that the weather starts playing a role. Boukreev couldn't see anything or anyone in the whiteout. Lobsang and Scott had strong short-range yellow radios and only black radios as far as the only black radios as far as Boukreev was aware, and they were still much higher on the mountain. So Lobsang and Scott had strong radios, but they were both high on the mountain, so they could communicate with each other, but not with Boukreev. Again, kind of a crazy situation. So he went back to his tent at 9 o'clock and waited for news. So he arrives at the bottom of the mountain at Camp 4, at the bottom of the summit pyramid, at 5, goes out at 6:30, and he's back at 9 without sort of any luck. So now you're going into the night, and where are the other climbers? What's happened to our team? What are you going to do about it, kind of thing. So he doesn't have a radio. He doesn't know what is going on with everybody else. And so what do? Do you fold your arms and say, look, I don't know what's happening, so I'm just going to stay in my tent and do nothing, right? So one thing he could have done is he could have gone to the other team and asked them what was going on. He could also gather his strength and make himself ready, which he did. The leaders, Hall and Fisher, were weak, still high in the mountain and in trouble. And he had to know that, well, he came back at 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock comes, 7, 8, and now it's 9 o'clock at night. They're still not back, right? And it's dark now. Leaders and clients, one by one, started to run out of oxygen. Lobsang spent 5 hours with Fisher before leaving him to descend on his own and find help. So Lobsang was, so if you're going to argue that from what Krakauer said, that Boukreev should have gone back up, or he shouldn't have descended alone. Well, you could also say, Lobsang was there with Fisher, and it didn't do any good. Fisher was basically too weak to climb. Another example is Doug Hansen. Once he collapsed, it was over. He sort of couldn't do anything, right? And so you kind of have that situation where I don't know if it really would have made much difference with some of the very, very weak climbers, right? Then Martin Adams, who had summited only a few minutes after Boukreev, stumbled into camp on his own at 10:15 p.m. So it just shows you how quickly Boukreev descended. if he got there, I'm just trying to think, 22, is it over 4 hours earlier, right? 5 hours earlier. It's a really long time that Boukreev got there ahead of everyone else. Boukreev said he was very glad to see Adams. Adams said he didn't see anyone. Meanwhile, 8 clients from 2 expeditions, 6 were Mountain Madness clients, and 3 Sherpas found their way down the mountain but weren't able to find Camp 4 in the storm, and so they huddled together. Their position was 400 meters from Camp 4. That's 15 minutes walk under normal conditions, and just 20 meters from the edge of the deadly Kangshung face. So that's the situation they're in, right? It's a situation of they kind of come down the mountain, but they just can't navigate because it's dark. And they are just 400 meters from the camp, or 15 minutes walk, but they just don't know where they are. It's like, and so I was thinking about it today while walking my dog. I was just thinking, what would it have been if you could just take all of that peril out of your mind? And I don't know whether I'm remembering the events of the story or whether it's something else, but if you wanted to navigate without being able to see, all you had to really do was concentrate on the fact that that saddle area under the top of Mount Everest, the wind would probably be going over it in a sort of how can I put it, at a kind of a 90-degree angle, right? I could be wrong in this, but I just would assume that the wind would cross that area at a 90-degree angle. Now, you would know that better if you were on the mountain a lot and if you knew certain things. But if that was a constant thing, the wind going over there at a 90-degree angle, then if you could walk into the wind at a 90-degree angle, in other words, have the wind being a crosswind, then that could help you to navigate reasonably to some extent towards where Camp 4 would be. I'm just saying you wouldn't be completely blind and directionless if you were using the wind to navigate. The problem is if you were turned the wrong way without knowing it, you might be walking in the opposite direction. But you would just need to know about which direction the wind usually comes from and that sort of thing. Does that make sense? If you just had some awareness of the wind direction, it would help you to navigate even though you were essentially blind. Vicky says, I hate being cold. This story is so uncomfortable for me. Nicole says, it's uncomfortable for me on so many levels. Okay, so they were going to get really, really cold now, this group. I've left out certain things such as where Charlotte Fox injects Sandy Hill. Sandy Hill, I think, just pitches over, and Charlotte Fox injects her with, I think, how do you say it? Denthamethasone. Can't think of the name now. I'll have to Google it. But it was mentioned in that documentary by Brashears. Anyway, so Charlotte Fox injects her with what she had, and it's used to deal with high altitude mountain sickness. So now quite a few climbers were in trouble, and there were in fact a number of climbers at Camp 4 who had not yet made a summit attempt. This is the other side of the equation. You've got climbers on Camp 4, they haven't even gone for the summit yet, and they're well rested. What are you going to do about the climbers that have come back, but they're in trouble? What are you going to do about it? So these climbers that had not yet made the summit attempt, who were available to rescue the climbers who were on the saddle area, but couldn't find their way to Camp 4, included the South Africans, Ian Woodall, Cathy O'Dowd, and Bruce Herod. They were kind of a joint South African-UK team, and 5 more climbers from Henry Todd's team. I think Bruce Herod from the South African team, he also died on his way down. I think he got tangled in the ropes of the Hillary Step. Boukreev had to locate the huddle of bodies on his own, but could do so only once Neil Beidelman, Mike Groom from Adventure Consultants, Lean Gamelgard, and Cleve Schooning told him at about 1:45 that people needed his help and where he would find them. So what happened here was that it's basically chaos. It's a situation of there's not really real communication because of this group that's somewhere else. And fortunately, this group figure their way out to Camp 4. And once that happens, there's no information to Boukreev, right? And then something quite incredible happened after that. But before that, Boukreev wasn't in a very good situation. He didn't know really what was going on. So you had Neil Beidelman, Mike Groom, Lean Gamelgard, and Cleve Schooning, those four, coming into Camp 4 at 1:45 in the morning, right? That's a really long time to be out there. It's like 11, 12 hours they've taken to get from the summit back down. Quite a lot of that time, at night in the freezing cold. So they now explained to him where to go. Acting on their instructions, he went out with no assistance. No other climbers would help. And I think you've got to kind of ask yourself at that point, couldn't John Krakauer have helped him? I mean, he'd been down there that long. I don't know whether he asked John Krakauer. I would need to review the information, but I'm just saying that could have happened, right? And bear in mind, most of the climbers in trouble were from John Krakauer's team, right? Adventure Consultants. Even the Sherpas who'd remained at Camp 4 were all suffering from carbon monoxide poisoning from cooking with a gas stove inside a sealed tent. Now, I'm not quite sure what to make of that. I'm not sure whether that really happened or whether that was an excuse or whether that was an exaggeration. But the point is that for whatever reason, the Sherpas weren't going to assist their clients when they needed them. And one of them, you could argue, was Pemba. Pemba had been there the whole time. Surely he was quite rested. Surely he was available. But anyway, ultimately, it was just Boukreev who went out. Now, no matter what you say about Boukreev descending first, he's the only guy who's in a safe situation and decides, okay, I'm going to go out of this safe situation into a storm and try and help people. He's the only guy who really does that, right? Of these people that I mentioned, I mean, there were other Sherpas, I think with a Taiwanese expedition that did something similar to that with their climber. Vicky says, the last time I hiked in cold weather, my hemoglobin was really low, which made it difficult for me to breathe, and I was very slow. When I watch Everest climbers creeping to the summit, I remember that. Okay. What were you climbing, Vicky? Can someone just Google that something depamethazine or something like that? Can't quite think of the name of that injection that you give. Stephanie, can you just check what that is? So Stephanie's right. Boukreev then made multiple trips. Each one is essentially risking his life going out there, right? So his first foray was unsuccessful. He went looking and couldn't find them. He climbed upwards along the route instead of walking along the flatter section of the mountain around Camp 4. Boukreev finally found pitmen with Madsen and Fox and gave them each some tea. He was only strong enough to bring them in one by one, and he brought the birthday girl, Fox, in first. Quite interesting that I thought that he did that. Then he got Pittman, the journalist, and then Madsen, and Madsen struggled to stay with him, and they left behind 47-year-old Isuka Number and Beck Weathers. And this is what I don't know if Beck Weathers knows this or whether he acknowledges this, but he'd become irrational and walked off into the storm, according to some people. As far as I know, according to his story, he was just lying with Yasuka number, but according to certain sources, he'd become irrational and he walked off into the storm. Now, you could argue that that didn't happen, and someone's saying that just to explain why they didn't help him. And we do know that later on, Beck Weathers was screaming for help and no one seemed to help him, which did seem to suggest people didn't want to help him. And that's where I think the dynamics come into it in quite an interesting way, is when somebody needs help, why would you not help that person, right? Someone needs help, why would you not help them? So I certainly don't want to blame anyone myself, but when I was climbing on my third day, my bike was in a really bad situation where I could only use some of the gears, and so there were some very steep uphills on the third day, and your legs are already tired. And I don't know if I needed help, but I was definitely in not a great situation. And so it eventually became, there were certain areas that I was climbing up where, because the gears were sort of getting stuck, because the equipment was basically failing and breaking, you couldn't actually use it. So I actually had to get off and walk. And there's a point where, and I didn't ask for this, but everyone in the group of 20 actually waited for me, right? And then when we continued on, there was quite a strong rider who waited and rode with me. And then when we got to a very steep uphill section, he actually put his hand on my back and kind of pushed me up. And it was both a feeling of exhilaration and excitement and camaraderie and kind of a good moment, but it was also humiliating. It was also embarrassing to be that weak and dependent. And I mean, it wasn't completely me. It was the bicycle that you couldn't use the easiest gears, if I can put it that way. In fact, you couldn't use the 3 or 4 easiest gears, which made it much, much, much harder. And it just sapped the power out of your legs when you were forced to grind slowly up these steep slopes. So what I'm just trying to say is that, you ask, why would someone not help? Well, in a scenario where you got yourself into the situation, like someone, and I don't want to put words in someone else's mouth, but someone might be looking at me and saying, geez, you didn't train for this? Not nearly enough. And you brought the wrong bicycle for this, so that's your deal. And they'd be 100% in saying that. And so with Beck Weathers, him going kind of snowblind and not going down the mountain, he got himself into that situation. So should you get him out of a situation he got himself into? Anyway, for whatever reason, they didn't really seem to care too much about Beck Weathers. And Beck Weathers wrote a book called Left for Dead, which the title sounds like it's saying, you abandoned me, or it's, somebody left me behind. But in a way, he left himself behind. He was the one who said, I'm going to stay here, when climbers came down and said, come with us, kind of thing. I seem to remember, and I could be wrong, and I'm scared to misquote, but I seem to remember John Krakauer coming down, seeing Beck Weathers. It could have been another climber, I could be wrong. But John Krakauer coming down, seeing Beck Weathers, and then asking him, can I help you down? And Beck saying, no, I'm waiting for Rob Hall. And John Krakauer saying, or thinking, wow, I'm relieved that he's not coming down with me, because that would be awkward. That would be an inconvenience, right? That's just a human way to think about it. But whose responsibility is it where Beck Weathers didn't go down when he could have and when he should have, right? Olivia Vast, thank you very much. And thank you for your comments on Instagram. You're quite a constant presence there. I think you're getting a little bit more background on my mountain bike experience that is not revealed in too many of those photos. So you see some heroic kind of images sometimes, but what's going on behind that, right? What's going on behind the scenes? So finally, at 4:30 in the morning, right? That's really a long time that they've been out there. Chef Betsy, I'm late, had to work just when you can. Can you give the date for the audiobook for this series? I'm having my Mediport switched out Wednesday. It's a necessary evil. A Nick audiobook would help. Dexamethasone, there we go. Okay, thanks a lot, Stephanie. You on the job, great. By the way, I'm going to be reading a theory that Stephanie thought about for a long time and wrote over quite a while. That's posted onto Patreon. I'll be putting that on. I'll be reading that out on YouTube. Just Stephanie's theory of the Chris Watts case. That's coming up. Something to look forward to. To answer your question, Chef Betsy, the audiobook will be, so I'll be narrating one chapter a day starting tomorrow. So you can actually catch that if you join Patreon. I'm just trying to remember correctly. I think Everest is on the $10 tier. Now just bear in mind, if you join Patreon and you join the $10 tier, then you also get access to quite a few, about half a dozen or more other audiobooks on the $10 tier, and that gives you access to all the audiobooks on the $5 tier, which is around about 15 or 16 books. So it's quite good value for money. So yeah, on the $10 tier, I'll be uploading a chapter a day, and on the $5 tier, that's of Everest, and it'll probably take 2 to 3 weeks to upload the whole audiobook. And then you can, of course, listen to the complete audiobook once all those chapters have been narrated, but it's sometimes nice to listen to them as they are narrated. And then some people leave comments, and it's quite an interesting feedback kind of thing. The other audiobook I'll be narrating starting tomorrow is I'll be narrating 2 audiobooks at the same time. Well, not at the same time, but on the same day, I guess. I suppose I would have clarified that. The other one will be Doubt, dealing with Madeleine McCann. It is we're coming up to the 14th anniversary. Stephanie says the $10 tier is so worth it for anyone who's able. I've listened to them all and a number of times. So if you want to join the $10 tier to listen to the audiobook on Patreon, it's www.patreon.com/TCRS. If you're not sure how to find it or whatever, just check the comments or leave a comment. But it's quite simple to sign up. Okay, let's just go back to what's happening here. So at 4:30, all of the Mountain Madness team were safe in their tents on the South Col, basically thanks to the efforts of one man, Boukreev, right? Everyone except the leader was safe. But the Japanese woman who had attached herself to the Mountain Madness group now found herself alone, less than 20 minutes walk from shelter, while her teammates, and this is the real tragedy. I mean, just think about what a horrible thing just think about her husband hearing this story. She's less than 20 minutes walk from shelter, but for hours, she's less than 20 minutes walk from shelter. And there are guys sitting in their tents for all those hours doing nothing or not leaving their tents, right? And her teammates were either too frightened or exhausted to save her, right? Chef Betsy, you're already a Patreon. Okay. Sorry, I've been off Patreon a little bit, so I'm a little bit rusty on who's where. And something else I've got to tell you is, I think I think something like, I'm not sure if how many patrons didn't renew during the past month while I was away. So I'm not quite sure who's there now and who isn't. But Chef Betsy, are you on the $10 tier? If you're not, maybe consider it. Carol Ann Berry says, well worth it. It has saved me. Okay. Anyway, Chef Betsy, thanks for that second contribution there. So that's the real tragedy. I'm sure, Stephanie, if you think back to that, it's just really heartbreaking. She climbed Everest. She was right there, and so anyway, when Neil Beidelman from Mountain Madness, who had helped her for much of the way down, heard that she died, he broke into tears. Krakauer writes that he cried for 40 minutes. And just think of the frustration with that, the frustration of getting her to the top, getting her all the way down. And I remember, I think in the documentary with David Brashears, he says in his heart, in his mind, when he arrived at the camp, he felt like he'd handed the baton over to Boukreev, and he's now going to, not just Boukreev but everyone else. They are now going to take care of everyone else, and it just wasn't the case, because if you're not a guide, then do you owe anyone your life? Do you owe anyone else anything, kind of thing? 76 are watching. Okay, so we're going to go on just a little bit further. At about 7 o'clock in the morning on May 11th, the radio batteries of Hall's expedition gave out, and David Brashears, the IMAX leader, called Ian Woodall from the South African expedition, who was also on the South Col, and asked him to allow John Krakauer to use their powerful radio so Hall's team could coordinate a rescue. Woodall said no, even though he was well aware of the stakes. So, you have these situations where a team is in trouble and the equipment isn't working, or there's equipment failure, and another team is in a situation where they are fresh and strong and ready and available, and now we're calling upon you to help, and then they don't help. And you could say, guys, we all not in this together. We're all in this for ourselves or something. You could say that. It's hard to look at that and not be angry. It's hard to look at that and not shake your head and just, what's wrong with lending someone your radio to make a broadcast? What's wrong with that? Is that going to cost someone's life? So that kind of thing, there's quite a lot of that going on. That kind of thing is upsetting, and it really upsets me as a South African to have seen something like that. Why is your mouth not in sync with your voice? Is it me or you? Is anyone else having that problem? Maybe just refresh your screen. Maybe just click refresh on the video that you're watching. When I look at my screen there, it's in sync, but I don't know. Stephanie says it's in sync for me. I think you need to refresh, Olivia. Okay, so even though he was well aware of the stakes, even though it was clear what was happening, so even though people were dying, it seems that this guy it wasn't going to change his mind or his heart. At 4 o'clock that same day, Boukreev climbed back up the mountain to Scott. This is where it gets quite incredible. You might say Boukreev should have done this, he should have done that. The fact that he climbs back up at 4 o'clock that same day, back up the mountain. Now bear in mind the summit times and all that kind of thing. Anyway, he goes up at 4 o'clock and he climbs up to Scott at 8,350 meters. He reaches Scott Fisher at 7 o'clock that night, right? Basically, probably at sunset, around about that time. But not that he would have seen it, because there was once again a vicious storm blowing around him. So there was a storm that whole day, essentially. He found Fisher with his down suit zipper open and one hand without a glove was frozen solid. This is really heartbreaking to read. It's really, when you look at pictures of Scott Fisher, he's vigorous, he's handsome, he's got something that just resonates with you. There's just a sense of, and I don't know, adventure, but there's something beyond that. The guy who led us on the mountain bike thing had that same, I don't even want to say rugged good looks, but it's someone who is tough and strong and charismatic, and you don't expect them to end up in a situation like this. And I think what's happening here, where Fisher his down suit was open and there was a hand without a glove, I get the sense that Fisher knew he wasn't going to make it, knew that he was beyond saving, and kind of wanted to, this is my theory, this is my opinion, he wanted to hasten the process of his own demise, right? Now, it's also possible that he was delusional. I think it is somewhat well known that some climbers can feel like they're getting hot. And so that is also possible, that he was becoming delusional. That's one theory, and maybe it's true. But I actually believe that he felt like there was no way he was going to make it, and he didn't want to take 10 or 15 hours to die. He knew that he was going to die, and so he rather died after 2 or 3 hours than not much longer. Connie says, I think Beck Weathers also removed some clothing. That's quite interesting, because he was, I think, quite delusional at a point. Nicole says it could have been a case of giving up. Absolutely. So Boukreev said that, when he found Scott Fisher there, actually was right up to his face. And he said the face behind the oxygen mask resembled a bruise. So if you just think of that blueness, but just the words give you a sense of what he's saying, He says Fisher must have died sometime earlier in the day. So, you have all of this stuff going on. We want to take a journalist along, him helping his dentist friend that he'd known for so long, the struggles with the oxygen, and all of it comes to what? Scott Fisher himself loses his life. Why did he have to climb the mountain that day? Did he have to prove it to the clients? Was he doing it because there was a journalist on board? What do you guys think? Why do you think he, even though he was ill, persisted in summiting the mountain? Again, was it the weather or human error? What do you think? I think in Scott Fisher's case, it was both. I think if the weather had been better, he would have had a chance, but I think it was big time an error in his own thinking, given the situation. People don't like to hear that, because people like kind of a eulogy where it's just, he was a great guy and he never made any mistakes. But what we're trying to look at is, why did people die, right? So anyway, and I think it's one of the reasons why Boukreev stands out as a real hero and a real human being in this whole story, is that he sees so many of the people in distress. He sees some of the dead. He sees Scott Fisher. He climbs all the way to Scott Fisher, risks his life for nothing in a way, because he can't save Scott. He's beyond saving. And just says it very simply and, very poignantly. He says, it was very sad seeing Scott Fisher that way, seeing this great man, this great vigorous climber in those circumstances, in a situation of defeat, not being a hero, not whatever. And you may not like to talk this way. You may not like to say, was it his ego? Was it ego that pushed him to climb when he shouldn't have climbed? You may not like to think that way. You might say, this is a human being. Did you climb Everest or something? But if you think of it just in a human sense, in a psychology sense, why did Scott Fischer climb under the circumstances, breaking one rule after another? What was going on? What was driving him? Was it the journalist thing? And it's hard for me to look past that. If there wasn't a journalist there, I wonder whether he would have done the same thing. What do you guys think? Let me say that again. Remember, Scott Fischer was right at the bottom. If all of his team were climbing up, or he gets all of his team to the top, he's achieved his goal. He doesn't really need to climb up himself. He's done his job in terms of his client. So why must he climb to the top? Was it because of the journalists that were on the mountain? Was it something else? Was he trying to, have so many summits to his name? I think the other possibility is that, there was also Rob Hall, and wasn't there personal competition going on between Rob Hall and Scott Fischer? Another thing could just be that they both gave one another a false sense of security. In other words, I'm here, things are a little bit tricky, but he's here as well, so I guess it's okay. Do you know what I'm saying? Stephanie says, I don't think he would have, because he turned around before. Lisa says, could be perceived protection of his business more than personal ego. That ties the journalist idea. That's a great point, Lisa. By the way, Lisa, it's good to see you here. I know you've read Everest, right? So, I do think it's about protecting his business, but there is a bit of a symbolic kind of ego attached in that, because if you think about it, did he really have to summit himself? His business had succeeded, essentially. Stephanie says, excellent point, Lisa. I agree with that. Somebody mentioned the high altitude contributing to their decision making. You can dismiss every bad decision as due to the high altitude, but I think there's a little bit. I think it's to me that psychology in the mountains is the same as in true crime, where you say this crime happened because of that disorder. This crime happened because this person has a mental illness. Well, I don't think you can excuse every bad decision on Mount Everest because of high altitude. I think there's, and when they come back and they write books, you can see those attitudes side by side. And those attitudes are there before they climb the mountain. Those attitudes are there on the mountain. Those attitudes are there in the tents in Camp 4, and those attitudes are there when they're off the mountain and everything's supposedly over in the aftermath. Do you know what I'm saying? Lisa says, yes, I love your books on the subject. Thanks, Lisa. I know you've been wanting to get into the subject for quite a while. Lisa, if you've got any questions or comments, let me know and we can definitely dip into that. Okay, so I'm almost done here. I just want to, I think I've got one page left. So Boukreev had found Scott Fischer. He said it was very sad. And just imagine this. Now he's got to climb alone and in the dark in a storm as severe as the previous night. So you've got Krakauer criticizing Boukreev for not coming down the mountain with the clients and rendering assistance, but essentially he does that in a way the very next night by going up to his leader and climbing all the way down the mountain. But just think of the strength of this guy, that he's been up there in this death zone for so long. He climbs all the way back up, Scott Fischer's died, now he must climb all the way down. And, it's not as though if he finds his leader dead, how do you climb properly? How do you concentrate? How do you have hope, and how do you have determination under those circumstances? That in itself must have been a very hard, lonely climb. The storm screaming around you, and your leader's died, and you're climbing alone in the dark, right? He says he found a man alone in a tent beside him. So when he intuitively found his way back to his tent, so just shows you he climbs in the same circumstances as everyone else, and just finds his way back to the tent, right? Unlike the other group. And then he finds this man alone in a tent besides his, screaming. So, he comes back from this nightmare climb, and he has a guy right there in Camp 4, alone in a tent, screaming. And again, you're kind of got to ask, what was everybody else doing while Boukreev was climbing back up the mountain? I mean, they're there for all those hours. What are they doing? And the answer is nothing. Sitting around waiting, and I think there is a sense there of, and it's acknowledged by some of the climbers, where they say, the problem is if you help this guy, you might endanger yourself. So in other words, I can't help, he's beyond help. I can't help him because then I might be in trouble, right? And that's quite an interesting dynamic to think about on its own, because I think there's some truth in that. But I think the joke, and it's a very bad joke, it's a very sick joke, is that Beck Weathers ends up kind of saving himself. He ends up walking out of the situation, and I think he kind of climbs back down the mountain with some assistance, but basically proving that all the people who didn't help him could have helped him and should have helped him, and if they did, it would have helped him. And I think one of his climbing acquaintances was a doctor, and shouldn't the doctor have known better, Just on that topic, which I think is quite funny and quite interesting, is he beat himself up over it. When I was mountain biking, I had a splitting headache on the first day, right? And I thought, I didn't know whether it could be coronavirus, because bear in mind we are quite a big group of people, and I've been mixing with people or something like that, and I never get headaches. And the other thing is, so Stephanie says, Hutchinson, I can see it on the one page, I can't see it on the other. Can we just refresh? Hutchinson voted to leave. It's taking a while to refresh, sorry. Hutchinson voted to leave Yasuka and Weathers behind. That's it. Beverly Lawyer, what's up, Rocket? And so, I think he voted that, and then everyone sort of supported the vote. And you might think, you know what, it makes total sense. It's the best thing to do under the circumstances. And then guess what happens? The guy actually manages to survive and proves them all wrong. And so in a way he was left for dead. But to me, it's, if Beck Weathers is saying, wow, guys, you didn't do me any favors, you didn't really help me, he's got a point. But the other side of the story is that Beck Weathers did act in a way that Well, I think you've got to, let me put it this way. You've got to ask why, besides the technical aspects, why some of the climbers felt or voted the way that they did. In other words, what kind of relationship did they have with him before climbing the mountain? What kind of people were these people? Were they people who thought about other people? Were they there to be the heroes of their own story? And when the story didn't quite work out, then what was it? Well, I need to take care of myself. What was it all about? Stephanie says Hutchinson was a doctor. He was from Australia, wasn't he? He made decisions there that put him in the predicament. Yes, Beck Weathers, he made the decisions there. But that's what I'm kind of getting at is, what happens in a situation like that? Whose responsibility is it when you're in a bad predicament? And I'm just saying, I kind of went through that myself in this mountain bike thing. I didn't train very much. I should have. Whose fault is it that I didn't? Mine. I took a mountain bike that wasn't a very good mountain bike. I mean, I didn't think it was that defective. I'd done a 95-kilometer race with it, and it had done it. There were a few little niggles at the end, a few little problems at the end, but I thought it was fine. And it completely broke in the last few kilometers, the last 40 kilometers of the ride that I did. And, you know, the lesson I've learned is you need a better equipment. But whose job is it to make sure I have a good experience there? Basically mine, isn't it? It's not another person's job. The guide can sort of assist you, but he can't sort of wave a magic wand. So if you're going to be dumb and make dumb decisions and get yourself into a dumb predicament, it helps if you can get yourself out of it. And this is where I say, you know, independent and control. Are you able to regain that? And to his credit, Beck Weathers did. I just don't know whether you can come out afterwards and then blame somebody else. I don't know if you can do that or should do that. I will say that during my mountain bike thing, there was a very, very long climb. And it was the only stage in the whole thing where I was right at the back. My bike was really in a bad state at that point. And when I got to the top, everyone was there. And it was quite humiliating. It was quite humiliating, and it was quite not a good moment. And there wasn't much sympathy. There wasn't much sort of people talking to me. It was the sense I actually got was, I think, I don't know this for sure, but the sense I got was that someone had said, as soon as he gets here, then you can go. In other words, because it was like a watering point. As soon as he gets here, then the rest of you can go. And so I got a sense, because it was cold at that point, it was very high up and exposed. And this was obviously not climbing a mountain, but mountain biking up a mountain. And they were just relieved when I got up there so that they could go. So where you say, were they cheering for you? No, it was sort of like, I got there and it was virtually like I got there and then they all went, kind of thing. And I'd been suffering. I had sweat dripping off my helmet and my face as I got there. And I was quite irritated and not happy at that point, just with everything. I just wasn't very happy. And I didn't think it was very nice, but you know, those are the cards you dealt with. But the turnaround scenario was really weird. I had a very short refreshment break. I had just a little bit of water and a banana and whatever. And then I started stone last. I was really maybe 2 or 3 minutes after the last rider. And they were very nice before that one. I just think that they got cold waiting, and they just wanted to go. And I was, it was just like, when's this guy coming, kind of thing. And I could have gotten on the sweeper truck, but I didn't want to. I rather wanted to not do that. And that was probably also something that maybe they didn't like. It's like, why do you want to walk up, or why do you want to take so long? I just didn't want to do that. Anyway, but the part that's quite funny is, I had a very quick, refreshing, refreshments, some muffins and so on. And then I went down the other side, and I shot down the other side. And probably within a few minutes, I tried to change gears, and the gear lifter, the gear shifter actually broke, and a piece fell onto the road. And I was sort of thinking of stopping and picking it up when another piece broke off. And I was just like, well, that's it. That's your day. That's the end of the story. And then I sort of realized, wow, I'm on kind of my biggest gear. And I just thought, if you keep up your momentum, this is a downhill, not completely downhill section, but if you keep up your momentum, you might be able to go quite far, but you're just going to need to work quite hard to keep the speed up, so that where there is an uphill, you're not going to go back to grinding slowly like that. And I did think there's likely going to be another uphill coming up, and if there is, that's where I'm going to have to pull out and just say, look, I can't ride any further. My bicycle's not working. And so anyway, at that point, I guess I saved myself, because I basically had a little bit of a strategy, and I was lucky. I was lucky that the terrain worked that way. And so what happened is I caught one rider after the next on my crappy bike and passed them with a, hello, whatever. And eventually I caught the front rider. Now, bear in mind, they also had a bit of a early start, what do they call it, like an advanced start. And the next thing, I was riding in front of everybody, no matter how good their bicycles were. So I was like right in front of everybody. And who would have thought? And then the downhill, so it wasn't just down, it was down with little ups and down and little ups and so on. And then eventually there was a section where it started to tilt up a little bit. It wasn't flat, it was just like a slight rise. And then there was also a wind blowing from the front. But at this point, it was right at the end of the last day. And so, I kind of thought, must I now race these people and try and win this? I mean, because it wasn't a competition, it was just riding. And I basically just thought, well, I've achieved what I wanted to today. I wanted to have a good ride. I had a good ride. I resurrected the failure of the earlier part of the morning. There was a bit of a triumph. Do you know what I mean? The sense of triumph. And I think the biggest thing that I felt was that I'd saved face, was that I'd struggled in the morning, and in the later part of the day, I'd really shown what I was capable of, that I was a brave descent. I mean, I was never taking any serious risks, but just a spectacular scenery, and I just really loved it. And I was relying on my time trialing experience, just using that momentum. I had some strength, but I think I was riding on sort of adrenaline or whatever, and not like everyone else was in a race. There were some people who were riding hard, some people would stop for photos, but I ended up coming in terms of all the 20 clients who signed up, I came in second, after being right at the back and really in a bad place, just everywhere, in terms of all of us, in terms of my equipment, and in terms of the day that I was having. That was quite an unexpected turnaround. But again, what I'm talking about there is where you reclaim your independence. And a lot of that's got to do with your attitude. I was lucky that the environment allowed for something like that, because it could just as easily not have. And then obviously when we were at the hotel and having lunch, I was the hero. Just like, wow. I think they called me the demon descender or something. And it felt good, but, I'm just saying that's how the pendulum can swing. And that was the experience I wanted, was that sense of adventure, a little bit of a sense of, well, there was actually a lot of camaraderie up until that point, but so that's my story. But what I'm trying to do is share with you that you might look at someone else and say, well, ego isn't a big deal, or hubris isn't a big deal. But when it's you, it is a big deal. And you might have quite a lot on the line, and you might work quite hard to get it back and fail, right? So I thought you guys would find that quite funny. The demon descender, yeah. And there was quite a nice moment when I said goodbye. There's a doctor. I kind of got the feeling he was maybe a little bit concerned that I might have coronavirus, because I said I wasn't feeling so well. There were moments, not that day, just earlier, where I'd had a headache and so on, and I just wondered. Anyway, right at the end, he said, "I really want to shake your hand," and I thought that's a nice thing to say, especially given how things had turned out earlier. So something I must say. I thought it was a wonderful group, and I'd be happy to ride with them all again. So, but I would want to be a better rider, put it that way. Thanks, guys, Olivia. Yeah, and so I did finish on a high note. I'm still feeling very sore in lots of places right now, but feeling quite. I'm ready to buy a new mountain bike and ready to sign up for the next tour, in maybe 3 or 4 months from now. So it's been quite encouraging. A friend of mine is trying to get me to just keep going, use this as a jumping board to more consistent fitness and all that kind of thing, So, if when my bicycle had broken, I could have reasonably just have stopped there and gotten onto the sweeper vehicle right there and done the last 30, 40 kilometers in the vehicle and been an absolute loser kind of thing, and felt like an absolute loser. And that section was probably one of the nicest sections of the whole 3-day tour. I think there was another section on day one that was also quite amazing. I'll tell you guys about that on another day, but it's also quite a cool story. Get a better bike, yeah, no, for sure. The question for me now is how much to spend on it. So I've been speaking to a friend about it, and he's going to recommend a bike, and I'll decide what to get. I might actually buy the bike tomorrow. So I've been to the bike shop. I must just decide. So we'll see. So let me just finish this off here. On the 25th of May, Bruce Herod, so this was about 2 weeks later. So despite the South Africans doing their thing with the radio, I think they actually had to wait quite a while before they could make their proper attempt. So anyway, bear in mind, all of this happened on the 10th and 11th of May. So about 2 weeks later, Bruce Herod, who was climbing on his own, way behind Woodall and O'Dowd. So the same kind of thing happened, that the team splitting up and team members climbing on their own. He walked over the bodies of first Fisher and then Hall before reaching the summit of Everest at 5 o'clock or later. So Bruce Herod summits way too late, and he, other people have summited late, so why not me? It had taken him 17 hours to get there. So when I did the Ironman, it took me just under 13 hours. That's the Ironman. Now this guy is just climbing one stage of Everest, took him 17 hours. I think when you do the Ironman, the cutoff time is 17 hours. So you've kind of done an Ironman here. Anyway, he would never return. Bruce Herod would never get back, and Boukreev would find him still tangled in the ropes at the Hillary Step the following year. The mountain is unmoved. I'm just going to read through this because it's over 2 hours now. Everest is no smaller than it ever was, but the motives for climbing seem to have steadily diminished. The New York Times. Having climbed Kilimanjaro myself, I know how quickly a strong climber can become miserably sick and dim-witted at high altitude. It's not the place for writers or even climbers, present or not, to make authoritative claims about what causes men on mountains to do what they do in the face of death and danger. Worse is the tendency to worship the god of blame. When exploring the adventures of men who died far from the comforts of home, we do their lives justice by simply acknowledging them and the astonishing confluence of events that come together in the world's wildest and highest places. We ought to, at the very least, imagine the vivid and stupendous scenes that swept beyond their masks and took them so far into the world. When Gamelgard, the stoic Danish woman, first stood upon the Khumbu Glacier, she was overtaken by its magnificent beauty. She stood apart from the other climbers and quietly wept. The mountain stands unmoved as men, the wise and the foolish, the tall and the small, journey through the immense chasms and cathedrals of the great outside. For some, when facing an objective like Everest for the first time, in the present moment, being there brings about a sinking feeling. I think Beck Weathers mentioned that there was a heaviness to the mountain, which I found not a very appropriate sentiment. But I've got to say, there was a heaviness for me on the approach to this mountain bike event based on my perceived lack of readiness. And I think there were a couple of times I did speak to the guy that was in charge, and I think his wife came to me a couple of times. I really don't want to make it seem as though no one was concerned or considerate or anything like that. It was just that one particular spot at the end of a very tough first stage where, as I say, I think they just wanted to get on their way, where they didn't seem, particularly interested in how things were going with me. But so it was just that one incident. And if anything, that gave me the chutzpah to, have an epic ride immediately after that. But anyway, the guy's wife sort of said, I hope you're going to have a good ride. And I said something that, the difficulties I'm having has got nothing to do with you. It's all on me. It's my lack of fitness, my bicycle. And that's important in a situation like on Everest, is you've got to put it on yourself what your crap is on the mountain. You know what I mean? You've got to acknowledge your weakness. And that's something that it made me think about Everest while I was there. Was the first night having dinner, I think they sort of looked at me and got a sense that this guy's good or something like that, just from me sitting at dinner. They hadn't seen my bicycle, they hadn't seen me ride. And it's a nice feeling. It's not true, and I certainly didn't, but you are quite tempted to believe that yourself. And I think that spirit also goes into Everest as well, where people come together and there's a sense of, we're going to be heroes in our own story together. We're all going to be fantastic. We're all going to be strong. But are you? And are you going to actually acknowledge that you can't do something? And I actually did say early on to the guide, I said, I think I'm going to need help, meaning with the sweeper vehicle. And he said, well, there's nothing wrong with that. But personally, I just didn't like the idea of, stopping and getting on the vehicle. I don't think anybody else did. But there was a lady who had a tooth that had been extracted, and she said she'd been thinking about it herself. So that, in a way, was a bit of a relief to me that I'm not the only one certainly feeling weakness or whatever. But it's in that scenario where everyone's like pursuing this fairy tale of strength and whatever, that you almost pretend that nothing's wrong, but quite a few of you are feeling maybe vulnerable. So the mountain stands unmoved as men, the wise and the foolish, journey through these immense chasms and cathedrals of the great outside. And it's happening right now. It's happening now with people are at base camp right now. Coronavirus is swirling at base camp, and the Nepalese government are not really acknowledging that there's a virus there. Why? Because there's money at stake. And so there's another side to showing weakness and trying not to show weakness. Why? Because of ego, because of hubris, because of, that whole thing. Allow the heroism to be the story. How heroic is the story of all the climbers coming back because they don't want to catch coronavirus? What kind of story is that to tell? For someone facing an objective like Everest for the first time in the present moment, being there brings about a sinking feeling, right? For others like Boukreev, their hearts are made to soar, and indeed Boukreev liked to sing when he was camping in the mountains. And I want to just end this off by doing a bit of a credit to Boukreev, a bit of a kind of acknowledgement to him. It's not really the right word. Chef Betsy says, I raise a virtual toast to amazing mods. Thanks very much. Well, you've been very generous today, Chef Betsy, not that you aren't generally. This is something Anatoly Boukreev said after cheating death in 1995 on Manaslu. He said, there is not enough luck in the world. I got somebody's share. So he'd survived when he thought he shouldn't. And that's what he said at the time. There's not enough luck in the world. I got somebody's share. The following year, Boukreev guided the first Indonesians up the summit of Everest. This is 1997. They also arrived late at 15:30. I think that's quite ironic, is that I think at that point he was trying to learn the lessons of 1996. And so he climbed slower and he was helping where he could. And so look at what happens. He gets to the top 3.5 hours after he had originally. On his way down the lower slopes below base camp, Boukreev met a Japanese man, Yasuka Namba's husband. They talked over a pot of tea. On December 6, 1997, Boukreev was awarded the American Alpine Club's David A. Sowles Memorial Award for his heroism and courage on Mount Everest in 1996. Boukreev was not in the USA to accept the award. He was in Nepal, attempting to climb Annapurna at 8,078 meters in winter by a difficult route. During his adventures in the mountains, Boukreev had some lucky escapes. But this time, he and his climbing friend were struck down by an avalanche on Christmas Day. Only Morrow, the Italian who was climbing with them, lived to tell the tale. Boukreev is known to have said, "Do not forget the mountaineers who have not returned from the summits." And so, that is unfortunately what happened to Boukreev. Basically, December 6th, the following year, he lost his life. Teresa Moore says, bless Boukreev, what a man. Stephanie says, thank you, I just love this group and channel. We have a wonderful TCRS mentor too. Thanks, Stephanie. I might talk about who was the first to probably conquer Everest, what probably happened. Maybe in another episode, you can tell me whether you'd like to do that. The next episode, the next live stream will be tomorrow, probably earlier for the British folks, dealing with Madeleine McCann. And again, you're not going to see this background behind me. It'll just be a view from a balcony. Quite interesting, I think. Timmy is sleeping. Let's see if I can show him to you. Timmy, come. Hey, Timmy, come. Oh, must I show you where he's sleeping? Can you see him down there? Timmy. Hey, sorry, I did take him for a walk today, but it is fairly late here. It's 10:15 in the evening, so maybe it's a bit past his bedtime. Lisa O'Brien, thanks for covering this topic in the depth it deserves and for your tributes to Boukreev throughout your writing. Very moving. That's actually the word I was looking for just a moment ago. I think if there's any climber on that expedition in 1996 that deserves a tribute, it's him. Nicole, oh yeah, I'm working till 4 in the afternoon, but we'll catch what I've missed. No worries if he's sleeping. I did take some photos of Timmy running around today, so I might post one or two onto Patreon maybe tomorrow or something like that. Stephanie says, I'll miss you all tomorrow while I'm at work. Okay. So I also want to talk a little bit about, I think this is just quite a good point to end off on, is being a prisoner of your own mind, right? So you see that on Mount Everest, you see it in true crime, you see criminals who, they're not criminals yet, but let's say someone like Chris Watts who decide something and then they do something terrible. They become a prisoner of their own minds, right? How do you escape the prison of your own mind? And I think, well, let me answer that first. The answer to how do you escape the prison of your own mind is you change your mind. But it's difficult to do that when you've become the mindset that you have because of the environment that you're in, because of the people that are around you, because of a lot of things that are reinforcing that mindset. So even if you recognize that you're a prisoner of your own mind and you reach the point where you say, well, I'm going to just change my mind, you're probably not going to be able to, because everything that is getting you to have that mindset is still in place. So even if you do change your mind, you'll probably revert back to it, right? So how can you consistently change your mind or break out of that mindset that you're in? And the answer is change your environment, right? There's quite a lot more I want to talk about that in terms of, to some extent, my views of the coronavirus, my views of certain of my attitudes to certain things and how they've shifted to some extent after this trip that I've been away. But one thing that travel definitely does, moving definitely does, physical exertion definitely does, moving across the landscape definitely does, is it challenges your view of the world. And if you've been in one place for a long time, your view of the world is definitely going to be challenged. The prison that you are in because of your mindset is definitely going to be challenged by the changing landscape, by different people that are around you. And that's important to do. It's important to be challenged because some things need to change. And it's not a real change if you simply just change your mind. It needs to be tested. It needs to be, when I say challenged, it needs to be kind of confronted. It's not easy to do. It's difficult to do. I think what I wanted on this trip that I took away was I wanted a bit of an adventure. I wanted a break. I didn't actually have as much of a break as I thought I would have. But I certainly did have a lot of the physical side of it that I wanted, especially in the last couple of days. That definitely did happen. So I'm quite pleased about that. I think I suffered a heck of a lot more than I expected to, but that's also on me. I could have suffered less if I wanted to, but I wanted to see what I was made of, and I guess I found out what my bike was made of as well. So Okay, so I think that's it, guys. This is I think the longest live stream yet, and didn't really feel that long. Hope it wasn't too long for you guys. Connie Lukens, coronavirus has changed perception for a lot of people. I'm not accepting a new normal. That's something I want to do a coronavirus diary on Patreon. I just want to talk about that aspect, sort of on its own. I think you're going to find that quite interesting. Also, in terms of this little group that I was with, bear in mind they pretty wealthy people and they're pretty intelligent people, doctors, lawyers. I actually spoke to one lawyer about the John Benet Ramsey case, and I'll talk about that a little bit later separately, but he didn't actually know. I gave him the legal spiel, and he actually didn't know exactly what the legal implications were, which I think is fascinating. Is that the legal things with the John Benet Ramsey case are actually quite complicated, even when you think they are not. Okay. That crackling outdoor fireplace and scenery. Okay. A change of environment works wonders. Okay. Obsession is a bummer. Theresa Moore enjoyed it very much, learned so much. So I'm going to be trying to get back to work with you guys, certainly on Patreon, narrating more audiobooks, restarting the series that I've been doing. But I'm also going to be trying to maintain. While I was in Plettenberg Bay, I was swimming, I was walking on the beach, I was mountain biking. So while I'm here, I'm going to try and just continue with that. Even though it's winter that's setting in here. So I'm also hoping to travel again in the not too distant future. It's been quite a long time that I haven't, but we'll see how that works out. Catherine Perez, they say you take yourself with you in the new environment, and that is what is so true with Everest, is when you go to Mount Everest, that's who you're taking to Everest, and that is what Everest reveals. And that's why I'm saying it's sort of the same thing anywhere else, is that you can have Everest in a marriage, Everest in a sporting event, Everest in a stage in your life, and you need to recognize what is going on with me that I actually need to change. And if you look at all these climbers, there's certain things that they could have done differently, all of them. And it's not being judgmental, it's simply saying, how can we be more effective, right? How can we have a more effective experience, not heroic, just where things work out for everybody. And it maybe doesn't sound as something that you can market and that's got a nice slogan to it, but it is something that I think we can strive for. Because it is part of human nature to sort of push weakness away, and that it actually creates a nightmare. And to the extent that we can acknowledge weakness, we can find our strength, I think. There's no geographic cure for anyone. That's what Theresa says. Beverly lawyer, Ramsey's got paid $7 million. Where did you get that information? I seem to remember it being $20 million. Do you have a link for that, Beverly? Okay, so guys, I think that's about it. Stephanie, thanks a lot for moderating. 12-Step Woman, thanks a lot. Thanks, Anne. Glad you enjoyed it. So I'm going to be back tomorrow, probably 4 o'clock my time. I'm just trying to think, 16. That's about 4 hours earlier than today. So I think that is 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. So if some of you are available, then you might see me. But this is really more for the British viewers. Anyway, Stephanie, thank you very much. And I'll see you guys next time. And wherever you are, take care. Thanks for tuning in. Ciao.